Shields up, Ironbreakers. Welcome back to Dragon's Dogma 2. Once again, we have another video here from IGN as part of their IGN First program where they get first dibs on pretty much all of the Dragon's Dogma 2 footage. This time around, it is a preview video. It's titled Dragon's Dogma 2 Preview, Our Thoughts After 10 Hours of Gameplay. I'm going to be going over all of this footage and I'm going to be giving you my analysis of it, my thoughts on the gameplay from my experience with the original Dragon's Dogma as well as the stuff that we know about Dragon's Dogma 2 so far. Naturally, there is going to be a link to this video in the description so that you guys can go check this out for yourselves because I'm going to be pausing quite often. I know a lot of people are like, man, stop pausing. It's like, if you want to watch the original video, you can. It's in the description, okay? Just pointing that out there. I'm going to be pausing a lot because that's what we do here. So, without any further ado, let's jump into the video and see what is happening.
I thought it would be a simple side quest. The owner of an apothecary enlisted my help to find his lost grandson who had been taken by wolves. As I followed the trail, I heard a screeching noise from up above.
Ooh, a griffin.
All of a sudden, I'm in a battle for my life against a griffin. It's a monster that's far too strong for my party to handle, but we fight and claw and hold our ground until finally we get it to retreat. I breathe a sigh of relief, then set up at the nearby camp and sleep till nightfall.
See, this is one of the cool things about Dragon's Dogma is that griffin encounter is not scripted at all. According to library footage that we've seen from the developers themselves, but even without watching any of that footage, we had events like this in the original Dragon's Dogma. Certain monsters will just show up out of nowhere and just be absolute jerks to your party. That's just something that is going to happen. They're going to harass you and bad stuff is going to happen. So let's take a look at what happened afterwards. But this is a really cool aspect of it. And again, if you guys watched our previous video on Dragon's Dogma 2, where we talked about the fact that there's not going to be, well, there is going to be fast travel, but that the fast travel is going to be restricted. Stuff like this is what is going to be an organic means of enjoyment while you are traveling the world. In my opinion, this is a good thing. I've seen a lot of comments in my previous video of people that are like, oh man, I really wanted to have fast travel. And it's like, I understand. I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm saying that this is what I personally like, so I'm happy about it. But, you know, each their own. Just be aware of what is coming in the game. Let's see what happened after the griffin encounter.
That sleep is then interrupted by the same griffin back for revenge.
Oh crap, look, it has the same health as it had when it left. So it is the exact same griffin. See, this might have happened in the original Dragon's Dogma. It's been a while since I've played it, but I don't think it would happen like this. So like the griffin coming back to enact revenge from getting beat up, that's actually quite interesting. Not to mention it hunting in the night.
That fight somehow boils over into another battle with a white, who proceeds to beat me within an inch of my life before I finally take him out.
So whites, by the way, these dudes, as far as I can remember, they only show up at night, and they were really tough.
Take him out, just as the sun rises after an epic 20-minute battle.
All right.
None of this was part of the actual quest involving saving the boy. It was just a series of events that cascaded into one of the most unforgettable encounters I've ever had in an open-world action RPG. And it was just one of the incredible encounters I experienced during the 10 hours that I spent adventuring through Dragon's Dogma 2's fantastic open world.
See, this is exactly what I mean. This dude also really enjoyed his experience, but it is all about how organic it is to kind of just like navigate the world and have all of these crazy things happening that aren't really even related to the quest. I was wondering if this quest was going to be super in-depth, almost like a Witcher 3 type situation, because, you know, that's not really what Dragon's Dogma is known for. So you do have some side quests, but usually the cooler quests are going to be the one that are main quests, even though when it came to the original, when you were like near the end part, I'm not talking about Bitter Black Isle or any of the DLC stuff, I'm talking specifically just base Dragon's Dogma here. a lot of the stuff, a lot of the enjoyment that you would get would be from fighting some of the bosses that were kind of optional and off the beaten path. So there's also that aspect to it. Those side quests can lead to some really interesting bosses. And I believe one of the things that they've mentioned in their coverage previously is that there's a boss, which is the Sphinx, and I kind of avoided watching that video because I didn't want it to get any spoilers because it seemed like it was going to be kind of spoilerish. But it seems like that boss is going to be completely optional, and there's going to be a lot of players that are going to be missing out on it, which again just kind of reinforces the importance of exploration when it comes to Dragon's Dogma 2. So if you really want to get to know every aspect of the game, you're going to be expected to explore a little bit. And for those of you that don't like exploring, then you probably can just go to a third-party website or something, because everybody's going to be pumping out like every single thing, spoiling everything through thumbnails and whatnot. So just be careful out there, but yeah.
While I didn't get to start from the very beginning, I did get to begin with the creation of my own pawn. Pawns, for those unfamiliar with the first Dragon's Dogma, are AI-controlled companions that gain gear, skills, and experience from your game, and then take all of that with them online where they can be hired by other players to be companions in their own games. I'm not going to spend too much time on either pawns or character creation, especially because we've already made those videos, but what I will say is that pawns are integral to one of my big takeaways, which is that exploration and discovery in Dragon's Dogma 2 feels much more natural than ever before.
So, very quick for those of you that aren't familiar with the concept of pawns, I mean, we've talked about them quite often, but I'm just going to give you like a brief synopsis. So the way that the game is going to work, especially from all the footage that we've seen so far and all of the coverage that I've watched, seems like it's going to be very similar to the first game from a mechanic standpoint. So the idea is that you're going to create your character, and very shortly after you create your character, or even immediately after you create your character, I'm not exactly sure how the progression, because in the first one you make your character, and then a little bit after that you're going to make your pawn, just very quickly after that. And I would expect it to be somewhat similar in this one. And the way that it works is you will have your main character, and you're going to have a pawn that is going to be your permanent companion throughout your journey. You and your pawn are going to adventure and, do crazy things throughout the world. And then other players are going to make their character and their pawns and so on and so forth. And you're going to be able to go online and recruit pawns from other players. So if you have a friend that is also playing the game, you can go and you can recruit his pawn into your party. And then let's say, for instance, you go with your pawn plus your friend's pawn and you take out a Cyclops. And then eventually, when your friend logs in, because you have been playing with his pawn, if you're playing online, because remember, all of this is optional. If you are playing completely offline, there will be NPC pawns that you will be able to recruit, so you don't necessarily need to interact with pawns from other players or anything like that. You can play the whole thing offline, at least if it's anything like the first one, which I can't imagine it not being when it comes to that. So, but the idea is you and your pawn and your friend's pawn go and kill the Cyclops. Now, when your friend logs in, his pawn is going to update, and it is going to know how to fight the Cyclops because he was in your party. So now when your friend goes to fight a Cyclops, his pawn is going to say, aha, it's weak to lightning. Maybe, if it's the same thing as the original Dragon's Dogma. Hit it with lightning. Like, it'll give him tips and stuff on how to defeat the Cyclops. Or, in case that you are going through a path and potentially that's where you fought the Cyclops, it'll tell your friend, I suspect there might be a Cyclops here. Stuff like that. There's going to be a lot of organic things that are going to be happening just from your interaction with your pawn as people recruit it. And in the original Dragon's Dogma, when people used your pawn, they were also able to send items back to you, which I think is the case here as well. But even more than that, you usually get rewarded based on the performance of your pawn, and that's how you got this currency called Rift Crystals, which gave you, an additional currency that would enable you to buy special things that you couldn't get any other way.
Foremost, there are no more quest boards. There are no markers that appear above people's heads letting you know who's got a quest, and any sort of symbols placed on your map to let you know of points of interest are kept to a minimum. As such, you'll really rely on your pawns and NPCs to guide you through Dragon's Dogma 2's world. NPCs will, more often than not, be the ones to approach you with opportunities for side quests as opposed to it being the other way around.
This is a really cool thing, the fact that the NPCs are going to seek you out instead of you having to seek out the NPCs, because it is just that more immersive. Like in a lot of video games, whenever you're out to collect quests or whatever, you know that those quests are there because you see, oh, here's the exclamation mark symbol, so I got to go talk to this NPC. But from an immersion perspective, it doesn't make any sense. Like you're going to get into town and go talk to a completely random stranger and be like, hey, can I help you with your troubles? Like it just doesn't make sense from an immersive standpoint. So the fact that NPCs are going to be the ones approaching you, that's cool. Or maybe another NPC will tell you, hey, I heard that this guy is trying to figure out this situation that he needs help with, and then you can go seek out that NPC and go do the thing. So really, really cool. Also, apologies if you hear background noise. I have my kids running all over the warehouse, making all types of noise.
You wouldn't happen to have seen a pretty stone?
You there! Did you see an urchin in a cap?
Cons will also point out objects of interest,
Just yonder looks to be a good spot for harvesting ingredients.
boulders that can be destroyed to find a path that leads to treasure,
If you need that destroyed, I'm your pawn. Shall I assist?
or if they already have knowledge of a quest from their owner's game, they will straight up lead you to those quests if you give them the go-ahead. All of this leads to a style of exploration and adventuring that feels very organic and appropriately rewarding, very much in the same way that Elden Ring and the two most recent Zelda games do. As a
See, the biggest problem about this is that this would work fantastic if people would actually not spoil themselves. But the problem with this is going to be there's going to be a ton of people that are just going to look up everything and whatnot. And that's going to be somewhat frustrating because, you know, that knowledge that has been accrued to their pawns wasn't necessarily something that was organic. They just, oh, I looked up and I know that this thing is over here, so I'm just going to go there and do it, and then somebody recruits their pawn, and the pawn's over. You guys get the idea? Like, I think it would be much cooler if it was just organically disseminated throughout the community, and I would, you know... The thing is, you can't really control this type of stuff anymore with the internet. We're just at a very different time nowadays. And fundamentally, there's nothing that the developers can really do about that other than implement something that is really cool. And I just hope that the community embraces that feature before they completely spoil themselves in service of completion of the game. At least, you know, that's all I can really say about that. You know, I prefer the more organic experience rather than, oh, I need to look up every single thing. But, you know, it is what it is. But it is a really cool feature, is what I'm getting at, you know?
alluded to in the intro to this preview, you also never really know what to expect once you set out to pursue a quest lead. The very act of exploring beyond the safety of a city's walls is unpredictable, dangerous, and enticing, which is why it's so exciting.
The ogre taking him.
Over the course of my 10 hours, I got to play with a total of 5 vocations: Fighter, Mage, Warrior, Sorcerer, and Trickster, which you can watch a whole other video all about. Unlike the first game, which had you unlocking advanced vocations simply by leveling up the base ones, the 2 advanced vocations were actually unlocked via a quest. After visiting the Vocation Guild, I was given a quest to retrieve a greatsword and an archstaff, and after doing so, I unlocked both the Warrior and Sorcerer vocations. I don't know if all of them will be unlocked this way, and I didn't get a chance to unlock any of the hybrid ones, like Mystic Spearhand or Magic Archer, but I definitely like the idea of not having to grind vocations in order to unlock others. My personal favorite of the vocations I got to try was by far the Warrior, who maintains the fantasy of being the great sword-wielding badass that brings giant beasts to their knees with just one charged strike, but also adds a few more tricks to their repertoire. Director Hideaki Itsuno heard feedback that the Warrior didn't feel like a super viable vocation in the first game, and thus worked hard to give them some new elements to bring out their strengths.
See, so the reason why a lot of people complain about the Warrior, for those of you that didn't play the original game, I didn't really play too much of Warrior, but I have an understanding of why people are a little bit upset about it. It's because the way that it worked is that every skill that you would get for a character was usually based around the tools that they had. So when it comes to something like a spellcaster, you would just have a bunch of spells that you could choose from. When it comes to, say, the fighter, or even the assassin, you would get tools based on, oh, you have 2 knives. Okay, here's 3 skills for each of your hands. Well, actually, no, the assassin was a little bit different than that. But the point was, most classes got to have 6 active skills because, say, for instance, if you have the strider, it would use bow and dagger skills. If you had the fighter, it would use shield and sword skills. And if you had the warrior, because you only had the 1 2-handed weapon, he would only get 3 skills. I forget if the ranger could use daggers. I think it could. But I seem to remember there was also one vocation that could only ever use 3 skills because did the ranger get to use daggers? I don't actually remember. I have this idea that the ranger could also only use 3 skills, and that's one of the things that people found frustrating because, I want to be able to use more skills, right? You want to have 6 skills like the other classes. So I'm assuming that that's one of the things that they're referencing.
For starters, we've jacked up the warrior's offense and destructive power, to the point where it's unfair. In exchange, its abilities take a little longer to execute. This makes the vocation somewhat difficult to use, but that's where the tackle comes into play.
Tackle? You mean like Monster Hunter Greatsword?
If you're attacked, you can use the tackle to cause an enemy to be stunned instead of being stunned yourself.
Hideaki Itsuno just goes like, hey, Ryozu, that's a nice tackle you guys got there in Monster Hunter. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna steal that, all right? I mean, this is normal to happen because essentially it's the same company. Both games are being produced, developed, and published by Capcom, so makes perfect sense. I think it's a good thing.
Making it easier to get into the vocation. The tackle he's referring to is a new ability called Barge that allows the warrior to execute a quick shoulder bash, even while they're charging an attack to interrupt.
Press R1 to use Barge. What it lacks in power, it makes up for in swiftness, and it can also be used as a follow-up attack after a strike with the greatsword. A warrior should barge their enemies without fear, as they have increased resistances and are less likely to flinch for the duration, giving them ample opportunity to counter.
Interrupt and potentially stun any enemy that's trying to stuff their attack. The vocation, after all, is built around being able to charge up massively powerful attacks that deal humongous damage. So this small change goes a long way in making it a little easier to get those big shots off. My favorite new addition for the warrior, though, is a passive skill that allows you to swing regular attacks much more quickly if you're able to precisely time your next button press when the attack actually lands. This gives a nice rhythm to the warrior's combat and allows a skilled player to compensate for the typical weakness of having a very slow attack while still making those very slow and powerful attacks still feel like they have their own place in the warrior's skill set. Also, if you're like me and enjoy the feeling of leaping off cliffs and slamming your weapon down on a monster's head, this is the vocation for you.
So you were the guy who was playing this like aerial greatsword. I mean, that's cool and all, but there's more to the kit than that. But hey, play however you want, enjoy yourself. That's the important part.
I unfortunately didn't get deep enough into the Sorcerer vocation to see any of the really big, crazy spells that they're so beloved for, but what I really enjoyed about the Sorcerer was the addition of a unique skill called Galvanize. This allows you to go into a stance that recovers your stamina extremely quickly, which is especially useful for the Sorcerer due to the fact that their spells take so long to cast.
Oh yeah, that is really cool. The fact that you can just go into a stance that recovers you fast. Because like, if you guys ever played a caster in the original Dragon's Dogma, one of the things that would happen is you cast 1 or 2 or 3 spells, and then your dude's like, I'm so tired. Usually what we'd do is we'd actually just open up the menu and just start gobbling down mushrooms and stuff like that so that we could get stamina back up quicker and get to casting again. But naturally, it's a little bit annoying. And even immersion breaking, popping up the thing and, I gotta eat some mushrooms. Whereas like this is actually cool and much more organic. And maybe there'll even be passive skills that will benefit from Galvanize or something like that. Maybe, next spell after you spend X amount of time in Galvanize will deal more damage. But at the end of the day, in an early preview build or anything of that nature, you will never be able to see what exactly the Sorcerer can do with really beefy spells. The Sorcerer is a class that if you want that visual spectacle, that's going to come around a lot closer to endgame, simply because the Sorcerer's powers, that they just scale so beast mode that You guys will see, okay? You guys will eventually see. You've seen the bolide from the trailers and stuff. I expect there to be even more amazing stuff than that, okay? If you guys don't know, there's a trailer where you can actually see two characters casting, big meteor comes out. All of that stuff is usually closer to the end of the game than at the beginning, so it's always going to be very hard to judge how cool the Sorcerer is going to be at the start in a Dragon's Dogma game.
In those spells, you need to use a skill called Quick Spell, which allows you to spend stamina to reduce a spell's cast time. All of this leads to a careful balance of preparing to cast a powerful spell, using Quick Spell to shorten its cast time, and then making note of whether you have enough stamina to cast another spell, or whether you have to break away and use Galvanize to get your stamina back up.
Oh yeah, here's another thing, guys, for those of you that aren't aware, because I understand that a lot of this is kind of for people that have played Dragon's Dogma before. This is not a big deal, and sometimes it's hard for me to get into the mindset of people that haven't played it. There's no mana in this game. It's just stamina. So even when you're casting spells, if you actually pay attention here, you will see that this gauge down here, this is stamina, which recovers very fast. And with the Galvanize thing, it recovers even faster. But look at the stamina draining as you cast the spell, see?
Another spell, or whether you have to break away and use Galvanize to get your stamina back up.
And see how the stamina went down because he was running away, and then it started regenerating near the end there. So there's no mana gauge. There's no limit to the amount of spells that you can cast. Just like, go to town, have a blast. You're only limited by the amount of stamina your character has.
Fun dance that made Sorcerer feel a lot more active than in the past.
For sure. Here we go.
Dragon's Dogma 2's open world is enormous, reported to be roughly 4 times the size of the already huge map in the first game. And I don't doubt that claim in my experience of checking out the map and wandering through just a small portion of it. It's big, but it's also dense, with exciting encounters both on and off the beaten path that were paced nicely so I wasn't constantly slowed down by back-to-back battles, but I also never went too long without having something to engage with. One thing that was important to Eat Snow and the team at Capcom was making sure that the players really felt the distance that they were traveling as they explored. To that end, fast travel is very limited like in the first game. You can only travel between discovered port crystals, and every time you do, you must expend a fairy stone, which are highly valuable items that don't come cheap and aren't easily found.
So it looks like it's going to be exactly like the original Dragon's Dogma? Good. Especially if they do improvements on how interesting the traversal between places actually is. That is going to make all of the difference.
Another option you have for getting around is using an ox cart, which is relatively cheap, but they are limited in the fact that you can't choose where you travel. The main one that I found only went from the capital city of Vernworth to the checkpoint town, which was far to the west. You also have to consider that ox carts are not a completely safe way to travel, as they often will be ambushed by all manners of beasts. Of course, you can just hoof it on foot, which is where you'll truly feel the weight of that distance, especially due to the new health restoration mechanic known as the loss gauge. In the first game, you'd be able to heal your entire life bar by using health restorative items, and recoverable gray health with spells. In Dragon's Dogma 2, however, every hit diminishes a portion of your max health, and the only ways to restore it are either by finding a campfire to rest at, or returning to an inn and resting for the night.
I believe this would also be the case in the original. There was also something that was limited, but you could recover it with consumables. So the spells themselves would not always recover your health back all the way, if I remember correctly. So eventually you would be required to, actually eat food or something like that. I remember something. It's been a long time, but yeah, this was already somewhat of a mechanic in the original Dragon's Dogma as well.
Fortunately, if you rest at a campfire, you can also cook some meat and get some much needed buffs, in addition to restoring all of your life. But there's a risk involved with resting at a campfire as well. The flames may attract monsters to your campsite, and as I mentioned at the beginning of this preview, you could actually wake up to an angry griffin coming back to finish what it started.
So basically this game is going to have a lot of survival elements. And by the way, I understand my kids are making a racket back there. My apologies. But yeah, it's almost adding even more survival elements than what we've had in the original Dragon's Dogma.
What it all comes down to is this. Virtually every action in Dragon's Dogma 2 has some combination of a cost and a risk tied to it. Fairy stones are risk-free travel, but they come at a very steep price. Ox carts are a low-cost but moderately risky method of travel, and traveling on foot is free but extremely risky. Then you must also consider whether it's worth it to press on in a questline with low max health, or backtrack to a town to resupply, whether you should avoid fighting the giant tanky ogre, or risk it all on trying to bring it down for both the experience and rare material reward, whether you should keep on the less dangerous beaten path, or take a detour into the unknown.
Jesus.
In the 10 hours that I played, these were very compelling decisions to have to make. But the real test will be whether those decisions remain compelling or turn exhausting in hour 20 or 30 when the map has expanded dramatically and you still have quests remaining to complete in a town that you're super far away from.
One of my biggest concerns is actually the quests that are limited by time. I'm going to need that to be much clearer than it was in the original. So in the original, there were multiple quests that would advance by themselves should you not engage with them. Like, there was a lot of missable side quests if you weren't paying attention, or there were quests that were just simply, indicated by time passing in the game itself. So if you were doing something and 3 in-game days would pass, some of the quests would just either get canceled, abandoned, resolved in a different way, or some of that nature. So I hope if that happens in Dragon's Dogma 2, that point is made much clearer than it was in the original Dragon's Dogma. And there's some ways for us to track whether or not something like that is about to happen.
Hypotheticals aside though, I loved just about every moment that I spent playing Dragon's Dogma 2 during this preview window. It doubles down on everything that I loved from the first game, makes some smart improvements to the way quests are handled and how you explore its giant...
That might be one of the things that I was talking about, smart improvements to the way quests are handled. Hopefully that is some of the stuff that I was talking about.
world, and the little taste that I got of the vocations is a tantalizing reminder of why Dragon's Dogma is one of the best in the genre when it comes to delivering on the various power fantasies tied to
Absolutely.
the classic RPG archetypes. Even after all I played, I still feel like I just scratched the surface on what Capcom has in store for players when Dragon's Dogma 2 releases on March 22nd.
Yep. It keeps getting better, dude. It's like Dragon's Dogma 2. It just keeps getting better. It's going to be the game that keeps on giving. This has to be the game of the year, dude. Game of the year. Anyways, obviously I'm super hyped about Dragon's Dogma 2. I can't wait to jump in there. As I mentioned previously, in case you got annoyed by my constant pausing and all of that stuff, do make sure to check out the original video over on IGN. I'm going to give it a like. These guys have done a pretty decent job of covering the beginning portion of Dragon's Dogma 2, giving us a lot of content to, get hyped about. And yeah. Thank you all very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe, bell notification icon, all that jazz. And look forward to more Dragon's Dogma 2 content here in the future. I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay strong, stay safe. Peace out.